There's a lot of bad stats. There was a chart that came out on TikTok, and it showed from the 90s the cost of rent going skyrocketing, right? And then they had the cost of real income, which was like flat. But the issue is that real income is adjusted for inflation. And guess what goes into inflation? The cost of rent. So you're looking at a cost of rent that was not adjusted for inflation.
Yeah,
and then you're looking at your real income, which is already adjusted for inflation, which is affected by the rent that's actually going up. And so when you actually adjusted both of them to a like for like, rents actually came down.
Welcome back to Young Money Mindset, hosted by Luke Corricchia and Robbie Holdcross. From the ground up, where we talk about mindset, real estate, the hustle, and everything to help you achieve your dreams.
Yeah, thank you guys. We got Tina Tamboer on. We're super excited to have her on Young Money Mindset. So appreciate you coming in, Tina. So let's jump right into it. I know we discussed a bit about some of the things Gen Z and millennials are facing right now, especially when it comes to purchasing a home. And I know a lot of them are renters, or at least a lot of the ones that I've spoke with. So what's some good news that we can give, our friends, our generation that are renters right now when it comes to purchasing a home? I know their parents, right, or their grandparents, they lived through 4 recessions. So
yes,
there's a lot I'm sure we can unpack with that. But
sure.
Let's start there and just kind of dive into what are some good talking points, or what's some good data that they can be aware of?
I think for the most part, there is no timing of the market. I mean, I think we should just get away from, hey, I'm looking for the perfect time to get in. The perfect time is when you have enough saved up and you can afford it.
Yeah.
I mean, with the existing rates, the only rate that matters is the rate we have. Not where it's going to be, not trying to get the ultimate perfect setting.
And it's really communicating that, right, to them, because I tell a lot of folks, like, hey, the best time to purchase a home is, depending on your situation. If you're able to afford it, then, let's go ahead and talk about, purchasing a property.
As soon as that opportunity is available, right? And I think, I know I sometimes have a hard time relaying that message to people. People are wanting to wait until the rates are better. They're wanting to wait until there's more inventory. They're wanting to wait until they can save 5% instead of a 3.5% down. And little things like that. And I think a big goal of mine for today was try to help my renters understand that the best time to buy is the first time that availability comes to you. So how can we as agents help our renters understand that?
Well, it's hard, frankly. I mean, they have to be in the right mindset to do it. If they're not ready, like where they're busting out at the seams of an apartment complex, or they lost another roommate, or if they're in a position, once they're in the position and they're ready and they can do it, then it's getting them over the hump of whatever their maybe insecurity is. And from what I understand, talking to agents like yourselves, there are 2 fears. The first fear is that they're going to buy their home and it's immediately going to devalue.
Yep. Right. I hear that one a lot. Yeah.
And that's where that type of unknown is where we just lean into the math. You have to lean into the math, and you have to trust it, because it's been very good to us for a good 23 years now, where the math tells us that your prices are going to be sustained.
Right.
Okay, that we're not seeing any kind of price declines in the near future. However, that is also a conversation to be had about long-term holds versus short-terms. If you're concerned about what your home's going to be worth in a year, then you probably shouldn't be buying. You're not going to be selling it in a year. Typically, the most secure investment for homes is if you plan on being there for at least 3 to 5 years. Okay?
And statistically, is that right? I've heard 5 to 7. I know a lot of agents throw out numbers. Is that statistically like how long folks hold homes is anywhere between 5 and 7 years?
No, it's 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5,
at least. 5 to 7 ideal, of course. However, the longer you hold it, the less risk you have. But 3 to 5 years is essentially if we have a big run up in price and then a drop off in price and then recovery in anyways. You're going to ride it out.
Well, and we convey to our clients, like, the biggest thing is as long as you can afford that monthly payment, because it doesn't matter if you purchase a home, the market goes down, your house maybe is worth a little bit more, but you're going to continuously make that mortgage payment. And it's not necessarily but I think with Zillow, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, has Zillow maybe or some of these these software programs made it more accessible where people are constantly checking their Zestimate? Because I would imagine prior to that, maybe even early internet days, that wasn't as accessible, right? I'm sure you would have to reach out to an agent, you'd have to talk to your neighbor, but I feel like everyone now is just checking the Zestimate, at least on their properties.
I think you should be taking your Zestimate with a grain of salt. Let's just, not to bag on Zillow, but for a while there, Zillow was, if you remember, buying and selling homes. And they were short-term holds, which is the riskiest hold you can do. And they were using their Zestimates for their purchase prices. And they lost $250 million by doing that because they often overestimated or severely underestimated, but mostly overestimated the prices. And so they're like, we don't need appraisals. That's for poor people.
Yeah.
And so we've got our Zestimate. It's awesome. But, that 10%, even they rank their own Zestimates as being within 10% of the actual. That's a lot of money. I'm sorry. If you're 10% overvalued or even undervalued, that's a significant amount of money to be.
Have you heard of the new warranty programs out that cover the possible depreciation on a home? I got a phone call the other day of a guy trying to pitch me on it. And I had never heard of it before. He said it's the first of their kind, but essentially it was an insurance policy insuring against the depreciation of your property. I think it's a crazy.
So here's the issue: is that home values do not fluctuate like the stock market.
Right.
Okay. So the fact is that even the Zestimate, which can go up and down, it's just not it's not rational. Frankly, they're using comparables, and if you don't have enough comparables, then it's going to make your valuations very erratic. But the reality is that home's value does not fluctuate widely enough.
Yeah, well, the craziest part about it too is their first trigger doesn't start until 10%. So they're playing off of clients that are.
That's so rare.
You're banking on a 10% decrease in a year. I mean, to me it's a crazy sale. I don't see.
Yeah, and that's only. Here's the thing, that is only experienced by people who are owning their homes for less than a year. So if you've owned your home, even when we dropped 15% in 2022, okay? Most of that loss was experienced by Open Door, which was a short-term hold. They lost $1 billion, okay? Most homeowners didn't lose anything, not $1.
Right.
Well, and a lot of them have low interest rates too, and that's something that I wanted to talk to you about too, because it's for example, myself, I bought a house at a good interest rate, and I have a hard time selling it. I know there's a lot of people that have equity trapped in the house, and it's maybe not the best, they don't want to be there that long, but you have a lot of people nowadays that just have these great rates that unfortunately are just kind of trapped by their interest rates. So do you think that plays? And from my understanding, this is the lowest we've ever seen interest rates, right?
Yeah.
We've never seen these types of rates before.
And frankly, I hate the word trapped. We've talked about this. They're not trapped. They're making a choice. If they had no choice and they had to give up their rate and they had to go get another higher rate, then I guess that's sad. But it's not really sad.
Yeah.
I mean, you're looking at homeowners that are like, oh, this is terrible. I have 4% and my home is appreciated by 9%. It's like I'm having a hard time having sympathy for somebody who simply is thinking, oh, I'll just stay here for a while and accumulate equity and maybe do some improvements to my home, things like that. They're not trapped. They're making a choice. And that choice was facilitated by the fact that they were able to take advantage of a low rate, which was, frankly, historically very low. And you didn't know, and that's why we're not really blaming. Don't blame yourselves if you're Gen Z and you're millennial and you didn't take advantage of the 3% or you just weren't in a position to do that. That was historically low. Nobody knew, other than people who had higher rates, that was an excellent rate. Right. You know what I'm saying? We had 3% rates for a number, 2 or 3 years. And then they were gone. And So many people were able to take advantage of that. But let's just talk about my own personal situation. In my 20s, rates were 9%. And I remember thinking to myself, how does anybody afford a house? I'm never going to afford a house. I'm never going to get there. But the fact is that you do eventually. It's very difficult for you to realize what your own potential is or where you're going until you get there. It used to be, back in my day, we got married. When you get married, it's easier to qualify on a dual income. In fact, all of the affordability indexes for housing are based off of family income, not household, meaning that two related people by blood or marriage in a household qualifying for mortgages. And the reason we do that is that people who are buying homes are generally farther along in their careers. They're farther along in their, personal lives, if you will, and they're more accumulated in their assets. So that's generally the homeowner. So in your 20s, it's unusual, frankly.
Yeah, and don't beat yourself up too. If you're out there, Gen Z, millennial, like seriously, don't beat yourself up if you're not like, man, I don't own a house just yet. Like, right. I think that is so awesome for someone to like yourself, Tina, to mention that, because I talk to people too that just they feel left behind, right? Or like they see their friends buying and they see their friends getting married and buying houses, and it's like. Mm-hmm. Everyone's on their own horizon, right? And it could be later on, and that kind of segues us into household formation. And I think the average person right now purchasing a home, I don't know if you have any data off the top of your head on that, but I would imagine that's increased over the last few years. Like, it hasn't been necessarily the 20, 25-year-old person purchasing a home. Yeah. It's really probably been, because I think people now are having to move in together. And maybe purchasing, getting a roommate, or even if they are purchasing. I had a buddy, for example, that, him and two other buddies got qualified and purchased a home. And, they were asking like my opinion on it. And I'm like, I think it's a good thing. I don't know how that works out too, because it's like, I don't know if I would want to get married to two other people on a mortgage, right?
Yes.
Like, there could be some issues there too.
Yeah, so. There does seem to be a little more willingness to commit to somebody on a 30-year mortgage and not a 30-year marriage. I'm like, the mortgage kind of follows you more so, but in actuality, we've done a lot of comparisons to this market to the 80s, and it is quite comparable, frankly. A median income for a family, not an individual family, in the early 80s was only $24,000 a year. That's $1,900 a month. And yet they were getting $69,000 homes at 18%, and those payments were 40% of their gross income.
Wow.
And so that's pretty ridiculous when you think of it. And yet there were people today, I did like a little impromptu survey on a lot of my calls, and I'm like, anybody who purchased their first home in the 80s, please tell me, how did you do it? And you get all of these stories of, well, I got married, that helped, or rates were 18%, but I was lucky I found an assumable at 6%, or 3-2-1 buy downs, if you remember those. Yeah. And they had assumables, they had help from family, they had, they purchased with their brother or their sister and got roommates. All kinds of creative ways that they got into housing, and not one person said it was a terrible idea.
Not one of them regretted purchasing.
Not one person regretted that. In fact, rates went from 18%, and then my brother bought at 10.5%. He's like, my first home was 10.5%. We didn't have furniture for a year.
Yeah,
we had a house, right?
Yeah.
And so
you think this doom gloom attitude of it's just not possible? It's really not true. I mean, it's kind of what the media is putting out more so than the reality of what we're making versus what things cost.
Yes, I believe that the best way to figure out if it's actually possible is to get out there and really start looking. And the reason I say that is, my nephew came to me and he's like, yeah, Aunt Tina, I can qualify. And this was great. He could qualify for low 300s. And he's like, this is great. I want to have a house. I want a garage. I want a yard. I want all this stuff.
Yeah. We know that really well, Tina.
I want 4 bedrooms.
And I know.
And I want it in Gilbert.
I'm like, this, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, this is amazing. That is really great as an accomplishment that you can qualify for that. And I'm like, how do you feel about Maricopa? And he's like, no, I don't want to live in Maricopa. But the fact is that if you go out to Pinal County, you will find for $360,000, which is on a 2-1 buy down FHA, you're looking at $2,100 a month, which is very comparable to the $2,100 a month it would cost you to rent an apartment that was 3 bedrooms or a single family home rental at 3 bedrooms. And you're looking at brand new. You're looking at nice homes. They're not dumps.
Those new builds down there are very nice.
They are. And if you look out towards Surprise, you look out. So it really depends on how flexible you are in the location. If you're not flexible in location, you're going to have to be flexible in condition.
And have you noticed any trends that are different pre-COVID versus post-COVID when it comes to people being more willing to move outside of these metro areas? Because like I've had clients that are like, we both went remote. Like we're okay now with Maricopa. When if you would have asked me 2 years ago, Luke, I would have laughed at you because I did not want to go anywhere longer than a 10-minute commute or something.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think you still have people who want to be kind of close to work, even though they don't have to go in every day, but they might have to go in for meetings and they don't want it to be too super inconvenient. But you also want to have amenities. So there are certain areas of the valley that are up and coming, that are still affordable, that if you can get in early and hold for 7 years, that would be amazing. Knowing what those areas have coming forward, whether it's transportation or entertainment, things like that. You get in early and you get to ride that appreciation. So what I look for in up-and-coming areas are 6 things. First of all, are they centrally located? Can you get to pretty much wherever you want to get to in 35 minutes or so-ish, Maybe not way out.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you can get to most places in 35 minutes. Are you close to a freeway? Are you close to an employment center like downtown Phoenix or I-17 or the emerging employment centers of the West Valley and Southeast Valley and Cure Corridor up in Northeast areas?
Yeah.
So you're looking for employment districts. You're looking for an entertainment district as well. Like, where can we go have fun? Are you close to outdoor space? Green belts, parks, things like that, hiking trails. And are you close to the airport?
I like that. And I know that last one you had mentioned, I believe, on the one of your last meetings that we were attended, about 30 to 35 minutes from Sky Harbor. And that whole, forgot the exact zip code, but just north of South Mountain, right? Kind of that south, is it South Phoenix?
Levine and Tolleson.
Yeah.
Those are, and South Phoenix as well. But that Levine and Tolleson area is really the area I'm looking at as the new emerging area, mainly because you've got the brand new 202 that just opened and exploded that area. Because it used to be you had to drive through the ugly parts to get to the nice parts. Now you can just breeze right through on the freeway. But not only that, but you have in Tolleson, you have a lot of new construction. So you have newer homes, energy efficient homes. They're right around the median price, and they're right there smack where a lot of the infrastructure is going to be built.
Yeah, and I know there's, kind of on a different topic, but there's a lot of the build to rent out that way as well in the West Valley. It seems like a lot of those communities, like I've had clients drive by and they're like, hey, are these available? And it's like, no, that's actually a build to rent community. I had my boy, shout out to Mark, I'm sure he'll be listening, but he was telling me he just did he just rented a property in one of the build to rent communities and he loves it. He's like, everyone's great. We don't have any
brand new.
Yeah, everything's brand new. He's like, it's
reasonable.
Rent's really reasonable. I think for that same house, he would have paid a few $100s more.
Right.
And he's like, Luke, I can't swing that right now.
Yeah. Well, and if you're in your 20s, that's okay. One of the things I try to let people know is that with the home ownership, the earlier you get in, the better. Even if it's a little more, expensive. Are you going to take that $200 and do something with it? Or are you going to spend it?
Yeah, he's spending it at the club, I'm sure.
Well, yeah. Sure. So the thing is that if you're going to take that extra $200 that you're saving and you're going to put it into something that's going to help your retirement down the line, okay, fine, if that's what you're going to do. But the reality is, in the United States, at the end of your working life, the majority of Americans have the majority of their wealth in the home that they live in. And if you're renting at that point, then you cannot stand or you can't tolerate things like your rent's going up. You can't just go get a new job at the age of 65, or 75. right?
Yeah.
Your rent's going up. You're way more sensitive to the cost of food and all of that. But if you have a home that has a lot of equity, by the time you get to that stage, you can tap into your equity to ride out periods of inflation like what we just saw over the last 2 years, and you are not affected by the increases of rent. Right?
Yeah, and because you have it locked in, so
Or you're paid off by that point.
yeah, or you're
Right.
hopefully you're paid
Yeah,
off.
ideally.
Yeah, and you're and I like we had previously discussed a lot of these 55 plus shelters now are becoming more and more prevalent because you have
Yes.
folks that were unable to purchase maybe at a younger age, and now especially if you've waited, it becomes more and more difficult in a sense too, because you can't necessarily go and go to class and get a new skill or get a new degree, or
Yeah.
you have kind of bills built up too, and you're used to living a certain lifestyle. So
Yeah.
my heart goes out to those people, really.
They do, yeah, and mine too. But it's one of the realities of living in our economy here is that the earlier you get into an asset-based living situation, like owning your home, that's an accomplishment. It's not a right, though. It's an accomplishment.
Yes.
And if you're paying a little bit more for that, you have to also look at the fact that a rent payment and a mortgage payment are not the same at all, especially when it comes to taxes. Right now, if you're paying, say, $2,100 a month in rent versus $2,100 a month in mortgage, you're spending probably a good $1,000 a month on just interest alone, which is tax deductible.
Yeah.
And frankly, if you take what you're paying in interest, it goes over typically a lot of times your standard deduction, and you get to have a bigger tax refund at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So there's that. Not only that, but the remainder of your payment is actually going towards your equity. You're paying yourself back.
Well, and I talk to a lot of millennial and Gen Z folks that have a hard time understanding the good and bad debt, though, because a lot of them are out using their credit card, and they're scared of the payment. They don't want to be married to a mortgage payment because it's debt, and they've been told that debt is bad. So if you could kind of lean into what really is, if in your opinion there is a thing as such thing as good debt, because Dave Ramsey, he
Right.
he's a
We know
no
Dave
debt,
Ramsey.
yeah, the debt-free scream.
Dave Ramsey,
Right.
and of course he has played a lot on KTAR, of course, and I hear him quite a bit. But he is, I will say, less upset about mortgage debt than he is about credit card debt. Credit card debt and car debt, on the realm of bad, credit cards right up there with the worst, followed by car debt because that's the depreciating asset.
Right.
And then there's your housing debt. Of course, they would like you to pay off your house eventually, and that's always like a big accomplishment once you pay off your house. But on the realm of importance, he is always typically saying you get rid of that credit card and your car debt first. But as far as mortgage debt goes, it does provide, again, that tax deduction, which is good. You're paying yourself back, which is good. And when you look out 3 to 5 years, that's really where you want to look. You don't want to see, what's my home going to be worth in a year? You want to be like, what if my home doesn't appreciate at all? Where am I at in 5 years? Like, how much equity will I have pulled out or, built up? And that's really what you're looking at. And that's what people don't realize when it comes to comparing rent versus mortgage.
And meanwhile, rents are probably scaling up, over the course of those next 3 years. And you see people all the time that just want to kick the can down the road because they think they're doing themselves a service by waiting for rates to drop, waiting for inventory, waiting, for a larger down payment. I think it's very important for us as agents to relay that the sooner you get in the game, the better you can set yourself up for the future.
Yeah. Well, and also, you're young enough too. I'm at a stage where I don't like a lot of risk because I've already accumulated a certain amount of money that I don't want to lose. But when you're building and you're in your 20s, you have a lot more leeway to make your mistakes if you're going to make a mistake. And with housing, maybe you make you make a mistake. You buy a home. Oh, okay, maybe I don't like this payment or this doesn't work for me anymore. Whatever, you do sell it. You can sell it.
Yeah,
It's still there.
You know what I mean? Yeah, the idea that you're going to be upside down or anything like that right off the bat is minimal, frankly. you do have closing costs and things like that to worry about. But for the most part, you should have had a down payment, which you will either use to use in closing costs or whatever. But for the most part, you're not going to have to come to the table with money to sell your house. Most likely you're going to get a check at the end. And the longer you've held it, the more likely you will have had built up some equity in that house in addition to your payments. And so I would say that at least with housing, you get to enjoy that asset while you are accumulating equity in it. It's a different feeling. You get to paint it whatever you like. You want to have a pet, have a pet.
Yeah.
You can take liberties with it.
Yeah, there's a sense of pride.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on down payment assistance programs for people that are struggling to save up that 5% or so?
Mm-hmm. I do have thoughts on that. There's nothing wrong with using that if you can qualify for it. The one issue that you will have is that if we are in a seller's market, a strong seller's market, you're going to get kicked to the curb because there are going to be other people who don't need that will look like stronger buyers. So the best time for a first-time home buyer, believe it or not, is not when everybody else says it's the perfect time. It's right about now when it's less than perfect. The less than perfect time for housing is great for less than perfect buyers. Does that make sense? Because the sellers don't have their pick of the litter for buyers. So they're like, well, I don't have anybody else. So, okay, this down payment assistance buyer, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with.
Yeah, we'll give
you know
them
what
a
I mean?
shot, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And so you'll find that the sellers are paying about 47% of all sales right now, and that's including luxury and everything. 47% of all sales have some form of seller paid closing costs incentive. And that goes up to over 50% when you get into 600,000 and below, which is FHA range.
Right.
And then the amount that you can get right now from sellers, the median is about $10,000. And that pays for pretty much a rate buy down, which can save you, $300 or $400 for the first year off your payment while you wait to see if rates come down. It gives you the opportunity to kind of see if that happens. But at the worst case scenario, you just get the rate that you qualified for.
Right.
Yeah, it's not like a variable rate where it could go and skyrocket. And, if you're a short-term investor, we have a lot of fix and flip wholesalers that listen to the show as well. Mm-hmm. And, one thing we've been doing a lot on our flips is underwriting more and more concessions in. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you can go wrong with that because, like you said, it like 47% of the times that flip under 600,000, you are going to have a concession, or they're going to ask at least for it. And if you don't have your pick of the litter, if you have the first or second offer, you don't want to be in a position where you're turning that down, and now all of a sudden you're sitting on market, and that furthers your issues. So just underwrite it into the deal up front. Maybe walk away from a couple flips that are too skinny.
Yeah.
And wait for that one to come up where it actually makes sense. And I know a lot of folks right now that are out there, especially a lot of the bigger players in that space right now, have been pretty selective on what they're purchasing.
Yeah.
From my experience.
And when it comes to flip investing, the market right now is still, I would say, guarded on whether or not it's a good time. And in every market, you're always going to have opportunities. So if you see a property that's good regardless of the market, you always take advantage of that, right? You go buy it, you make your money off of it. However, you're not going to see as many of those in markets that are not sellers markets. And so the issue is right now we're in a very, very weak seller market, which is good for buyers, frankly, because they can buy their home and they don't have to worry about it depreciating, and they can still get some pretty decent incentives from the sellers. But if you're a flip investor and you overpay for a home, or over improve on a home, you can't take that mistake and ride it out with appreciation.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
We'll wait a few months for the market to catch up.
I mean, and that's the thing. In the markets that we've had in 2021, 20 and 21 for flipping, you could be a terrible flip investor and still make a lot of money. You could make terrible decisions, but just ride the market out because it was going up so fast and you could still make a little bit of money. That's what we used to say, even a turkey can fly in a hurricane. You know what I mean? It was pretty easy. But now this type of market is you have to be smart. You really have to know your costs. You have to know for sure what the bottom line is on that property, and you have to be very good at what you do.
You do, and one thing that really stuck out to me that you had mentioned, and I believe in a previous podcast, was, in a depreciating market, it's very difficult to say, hey, we're going to buy it at X and we're going to sell it at Y, because it's hard to really know what is that, how much is it really going to depreciate? Is it going to be X percentage or is it going to be Y? So that was honestly what keeps me up at night. I'm like, if we get in
roulette wheel a little bit,
if we were to get into a depreciating market, what would you say to someone out there that is trying to learn how to really underwrite and really understand the numbers? Like, I know your Cromford Market Index, that's something that we track.
Yeah.
I would recommend everyone listening to the show go subscribe to the Cromford Report. I know a lot of people get it at their title company, but go subscribe.
Hush your face.
Go subscribe, support Tina and the Cromford Report.
It is truly amazing.
It really is.
The best source for information.
And just to throw it out there, since you threw it out there, we are proprietary. We are only for real estate agent members of the MLS, not title companies or lenders. We're not allowed to sell subscriptions to them. We have a specific data license with the MLS that says our data is for you, the member. So
the agents, yeah.
And so as a result, this information can only get to the client through you.
Yes.
As a licensee. So that's why I'm like, hush your face.
Yes.
I know it gets abused out there. I'm not completely ignorant to that fact, but realize that it's very special out here. The relationship we have with the MLS, you can't just get the same data in, say, Seattle or Washington, D.C. or anything, because data companies don't typically like to give out their data to other data companies.
So it's not just the generic API key that anybody can go purchase through their brokerage, then it's a separate built relationship through MLS.
Yeah, it's absolutely separate, and it's built off of trust that we've had with the MLS since 2005, 2006, and 2007, built by Michael Orr, who's a mathematician from Oxford. And they brought these analytics to the forefront during the crash of 2008. And our mission, if it was, if you can say, for me, I went through 2008 as a salesperson, a lot of PTSD. And so the worst part of going through that whole crash is not having the data, knowing that it was available, but not having it to give us any kind of inclination of what was happening. So a lot of agents just, if you've ever heard the term chasing the market down.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they do the price reduction and they're still too high. And they do another price reduction and they're still too high. That is just not a good place to be. But with the Cromford Market Index, what that's created for us is the ability to now guide people through times of uncertainty, and especially flip investors to be like, stop buying properties now. Right. Like when you see that thing going down by like a double black diamond ski slope, that is the time to stop buying, to sell everything you have and wait.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say too, from an agent, it's like I really appreciate all the work you do, Tina, and I know you do a lot of work, I'm sure behind the scenes, and you help a lot of agents, and in turn they help a lot of clients out there make informed decisions. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, and thank you. I think a lot of times we say we don't sell stats, we sell confidence.
Yeah.
And as a buyer, especially a first-time home buyer, you want to feel like you're making an educated,
calculated decision.
Yeah. There's always risk in everything, but at least you're making an educated decision. Like the level of risk that you're taking on. The metrics today tell us you can buy a home. It's not going to go up by $20,000 in 2 months like it was, in 2021. So you're not in that situation, which is scary all by itself. And you're also not in a situation where if you wait a week, the prices are going to plummet or anything. They're going to, as a seller, you don't have to worry about your prices not sustaining themselves either. But at the same time, we have this little thing called seasons here too. So as a buyer, especially a first-time home buyer, the best time is to come out in the beginning part of the season, because right now everybody's at the open.
They're
not paying attention. But when you look at our seasonality, you will see certain zip codes just quietly every week get hotter and hotter and hotter all the way from now up until May. And we have a video on this, we can share it with you, that just shows how the expansion of the heat of the season starts out and peaks right around May or June before it cools off in the summertime and then finally into the fourth quarter. So there is a ebb and flow. And as a first-time home buyer, if you're getting assistance or you really want to have that that concession from the seller, then this is really, you need to get out there. You need to figure out what the inventory is for you, get with your lender, figure out exactly what your situation is, and find out, is this impossible for me? Because most likely you're going to find that it's not impossible. You might just have to change some of your ideas of where you're going to live, or what the condition of the home is going to be, or whether it's going to be a single family or condo, things like that. But I definitely am a proponent of home ownership as early as you can get. I didn't actually get to own a home until after I got married. I'll be honest about that. So I didn't really own a home until I was about 31.
On the flip side of that, what are the best months as a seller to get the most out of your home?
The best month to get so it's not about price, it's actually about activity.
Right.
So if you're in the first quarter, that spring season, first and second quarter, that is where you have the most buyer activity in general. Okay. It's exciting, it's nice, but will you get more for your home? Probably not, but you'll sell your home faster.
Right.
Generally. Same thing in the fourth quarter, but the opposite, where it's not necessarily going to affect your price, but you're going to be on the market a little bit longer.
Yeah.
That's all. So.
And for your subscribers, for your followers, I've had a couple agents ask me. I know you had a couple agents on your team here ask you as well. And we just talked about building that confidence in your buyers and sellers. So as a listing agent, I'm going on an appointment. What statistics and data do you think I should bring with me from your Cromford Report to help build that confidence in them?
My favorite report is the one that just shows how many contracts every week are being accepted in their price range in their area.
Right. So contract ratio, is that?
Nope. It's just a flat number. It's not even a crazy calculation. It's just a count. It's like, this is how many contracts were accepted last week in your price range, in your zip code.
Okay.
That's how many buyers you're competing for. Okay. And then the second one is how many days on market they were on prior to contract. So was it 18 days? Kind of gives you an expectation of, okay, is it going to be 7 days, or is it going to be 3 weeks, before I can find a contract that I can accept. And then the third one is their list price at contract. So is it going up? Is it going down? Is it flat? That tells you, do I want to push the market on my price at list on the first day, or do I want to come in pretty aggressive and stay right in the comps? Or is my home, of course, it's an average, so better than average homes will go for more. Homes that are less than average will go for less, right? But it kind of helps with the strategy of, I'm competing for, say, 4 buyers a week are writing acceptable offers in my price range every week. I want to get one of those. Yeah. Or maybe you're finding that you're in the upper range and you only get 1 buyer every month. Now every showing counts. Right. So I like that one because it gives them a good idea of how to come out in their first week being active. Also, there's another one to supplement it that gives you your active inventory every day to see, is your active inventory, your competitors going up or down. It works for both buyers and sellers too.
So you're the same data you just said then for buyers as well? Absolutely,
because the same number of buyers that the seller is competing for is the same number of buyers that those buyers are competing with, So, and, when they see days on market, then they realize, if it's very low days on market, then they don't have a lot of time if they see a property that they like.
Right.
So everybody's not in a hurry until they are, until they see the perfect property. Now they're like, okay, now we got to get everything. And so it's you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row, so when that property comes up, you can just go in and if it's a good price, right off the bat for the condition and all of that stuff. You don't have to feel like, am I paying too much for this house?
I feel like not enough agents really do that side of the business. We have a lot of agents that are unfortunately dead weight that don't really want to do the back end research to understand what you teach to all of us as agents. I think what you do is extremely important for all of us in the Arizona real estate market.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, you can thank all of my PTSD for all of the bad markets that we've been through that we're like, okay, let's not repeat that. But I think though, that as far as the younger generation comes along, I'll be honest, I think it was AOL in my day, back in my day. So there wasn't all of this massive information that comes out. And there's a lot of bad stats. I mean, stats that give us all a bad name out on TikTok, and sometimes they get sent to me like, "What do you think of this?" I'm like, "This is the worst chart I've ever seen." And I'll give you one example. Okay, there was a chart that came out on TikTok, and it showed from the 90s the cost of rent going skyrocketing, right? And then they had the cost of real income, which was like flat. All right. Now, those two lines seem pretty straightforward, right? And they looked very alarming because they were going like this, right?
Right.
But the issue is that real income is adjusted for inflation. And guess what goes into inflation? The cost of rent. So you're looking at a cost of rent that was not adjusted for inflation.
Yeah.
Then you're looking at your real income, which is already adjusted for inflation, which is affected by the rent that's actually going up. And so when you actually adjusted both of them to a like for like, rents actually came down.
Well, and that's huge. And I mean, I talk to a lot of Gen Z and millennials that just, they love to see that headline or that TikTok 2-minute or 2-second short and just say, whoa, it's me. I can't afford it. You guys, you know.
It brings them comfort, right?
Yeah.
Being complacent. It brings them comfort in thinking that they know it's out of reach.
Yeah. Like, oh, well, I
can't
even
do it.
try. I'm just going to continue on. But the reality is this, and let me tell you this. When I was in my 20s, I keep going back to the 90s, right? Okay. Interest rates were 9%. I honestly felt like this is ridiculous. I had a 2-bedroom. Now, don't laugh. I had a 2-bedroom, 1 bath in Central Phoenix. I was paying by myself $550 a month for it. Okay. It was across the street from a crack den at the time. It's really nice now. It was a crack. In fact, I thought it was a really nice neighborhood because the police would drive by without the lights on, and I thought, isn't that nice? I feel so safe. I was clearly very young. Anyway, the thing is that had I known how people were buying real estate back then, I probably could have bought. But I was looking straight up at only conventional. I didn't know anything about FHA. Right? I was just going off of what the news said, the rates were this, or whatever one loan officer I said my payment would be this. And I'm like, I'm paying $550 a month if I wanted to buy my own 1-bedroom, 1 bath. And the only thing I wanted was inside laundry and a dishwasher.
Wow.
Like,
that
would make my whole life. It's just to have those two things. I would be in the lap of luxury. And I would have had to pay nearly $1,000 a month. I'm like, that's ridiculous. I don't make nearly enough money to pay that. So I thought, oh, well, I just won't be able to buy a house. But the fact is, I talk later on, here I am now, much older. And my friends who bought back in their 20s, my boyfriend bought his first home, assumable, no qualify, just assume this guy's payments on a credit card. He bought it with a credit card.
That's solid.
Which he paid off with his commission. And he just assumed this guy's payment. And I'm like,
Wow.
Had I known I could have done that, I probably would have bought a house. Or if I'd known anything about FHA, or if I'd known anything about assisted down payment, I probably would have gone that route. But the fact is, I just didn't have the information. And I just went, I guess I won't be buying a house.
Well, and that's one of our big missions here at Young Money Mindset is to educate, these generations to really understand all of their different options. And one big option that I've even been utilizing is seller financing, creative financing. So I'd love to learn a little bit from you about subject to. I know that's kind of the trendy way to say it these days. So, and we've been looking at them and buying them, and adding them into our rental portfolio. And, there's been a lot of talk on them, but I don't think they're anything new. From my understanding, right, they're not new.
Rebranded.
A lot of agents, though, will tell you it's illegal. Right, it's this is a brand new illegal thing that you guys are trying to do with subject to purchases.
It's not illegal. It's against the lender's rules, but it's not illegal. It's risky for the seller. Essentially, if you are a seller and you're agreeing to what we would call, the old name was a wrap, where you're wrapping up an old loan into a new loan, and you're getting. Basically, you are assuming the seller's payment, but you're not letting their lender know about it. It's not illegal. It's just secret.
Yeah. It is, yeah.
Does that make sense? It's not illegal, but what can happen is that legally, the lender can come back and say, I don't like that. You need to pay the entire mortgage.
Yeah.
now. You need to pay the whole thing. And so that's a risk to the seller that they have to take on. And most of sellers don't really want to take on that risk unless they really have to.
Unless they have to, and maybe that eases the concern. And I've, used that same example when I'm speaking with clients that are trying to purchase a house. Worst case scenario, if you were, let's say, upside down, right? The biggest fear for buyers, you were upside down in a property. Usually, not always, but usually you would be able to find an investor, that would come in and at least take that negative equity and be able to continue, even if it's a negative cash flow play, right? Where maybe they're losing $200 a month, $100 a month, but they're able to, ride it out and ride through that time.
Right.
So, and that sometimes clicks in my client's head is like, oh, wait, so maybe worst case scenario, you're telling me, Luke, if the market were to go down, hypothetically, the market crashes the day after I buy and I lose my job and I can't make my mortgage payment, I don't have to foreclose like I saw maybe my family go through.
Yeah, very few people with a 2.5% to 3% mortgage are going to face foreclosure. Okay, just not going to happen. They have way too many choices. They could rent their property out for what they owe and undercut every other landlord in town.
Yeah.
I mean, if they wanted to, or they could do an assumption where somebody picks up their, and frankly, many lenders, as long as their loan is getting paid, they may overlook it. It's the minute that it's not paid.
Yep.
Right.
That's where the risk comes in. So that's why a lot of sellers will have at least $1 going to them so that when they get their dollar payment, they know that their mortgage payment's been paid.
Yeah.
And if they don't get that, then they know they have to go make that mortgage payment.
Yeah, or we even have our escrow or the servicing companies now are sending them emails and they're CC'd onto everything, the statements and all of that.
And often they're not that long. They might only be doing that for maybe a year or so. It's not like the rest of the loan. Typically they're refinanced into a traditional eventually.
Well, and as an investor, I mean, we're obviously trying to get them for 10 years, 7 to 10 years to reduce our risk as well. Like if I tell you, I'm going to take it over subject to, but in a year I have to refi, like I'm looking at it too, like from a risk standpoint of like where are rates going to be at, what does that look like? Does this deal still make sense? But, even going back to the different options millennials and Gen Z have, or even seller carries, traditional seller financing. And I mention that because a lot of people don't realize that there is people in a different stage of life. We're in a building phase. We're trying to purchase assets, but there's other people in a maintaining phase, right? Where they just want to maintain their wealth and they don't necessarily need to, maybe they have a paid off property. And if you can pay them, market interest or maybe slightly above that, they would be willing to seller finance you that property. And a lot of them, they only think they have to go to Wells Fargo or Chase or Bank of America to get a loan.
There are a lot of, here's another angle that some people have taken where FHA recently, I'm sure you already know this, FHA changed their program for multifamily where if you're going to live in, say, a 3-plex or a 4-plex and you're going to live in one of the units, you only have to put 3.5% down. And you can buy the whole thing and then rent out the other 3.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But some people are like, well, hey, maybe I can't afford that by myself, but I can get another family who can live in another unit and then rent those other 2 out. Or we can all 4 of us buy one unit and all live in it, So there are multiple ways. And a lot of the baby boomers that I interviewed on their first home, like one of my analyst friends, he said, I bought my first home with 3 of my buddies. Yeah. We all bought, and then one got married, so he bought us out, and we all made money, and it was great.
Kicked us out.
Yeah, exactly. He got married. He's like, you guys get out. I'll give you some money. And so, it's however you figure it out. And, even my nephew had help from his parents. There's all kinds of ways to get your foot into the housing market.
And that FHA, so it's a 4-plex, it's $1.2 million, correct? Is that...
I'm not a lender, so always talk to your lender. I know enough to be dangerous. I don't think it has to be just a 4-plex. It's just like multifamily.
Yeah.
I meant up to a 4-plex.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. But always talk to your lender.
Yeah. Well, and I know, I mean, speaking of multifamily, it's still considered residential, right?
Yes.
Anything sub 4 is residential. And I know that at least I've been looking at, the 2 to 4 unit multi, and it's like, it's so hard to find. I mean, if we're being honest, like to find something that's halfway decent that, doesn't necessarily need to, be burned to the ground and rebuilt. Like there's.
Well, yeah. And I think that what I want to get across is that nothing in real estate is ever forever. Today you may be having a hard time finding those. But you may have quite a few people that don't have 30-year mortgages, that they have 5-year adjustables. And once those 5-year adjustable mortgages, which are commercial loans, once they adjust, you might have somebody there that's like, okay, I'd really like to sell this now. The cash flow's not there. So one of two things that's going to have to happen. Either they're going to sell off the individual units, like turn it into a condo complex, or they're going to have to drop the price and sell it at a lower price to accommodate the cash flow for a new buyer.
Do you think that would be a good strategy or possibly something worth looking into more? Because I haven't really done a whole lot of research on doing that, like buying a commercial building, right, and turning them into condos. Because and theoretically that would help our inventory issue.
It would.
Lower.
I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that coming up where they were originally supposed to be apartments. They're not getting the rates that they need, or their vacancy rates are too high, and their loans are getting ready to adjust from 3% or whatever they got to the going rate. And so it's a good idea to get in with somebody who knows how to convert those, because that is a big deal. We haven't really done a lot of conversions since 2005.
Yeah, and that would definitely be something I would love to learn more about.
Yeah,
but.
And that's the thing about real estate, is that what's old is then new again. And so the wraps, which we have not needed to do wraps or subject twos in literally 25 years, but here they are, right? We haven't had to do a buy down in 25, 30 years, but yet, look at that. We just took it off the shelf, dusted that off in 2022, and trained a bunch of people on how to do that. And so we have tools in real estate for these times of stress, if you will. And then when that stress goes away, we stick them back on the shelf to collect dust once again. And so condo conversions are one of those tools. Rate buy downs are one of those tools. Subject twos are tools. We have all kinds of things that, the experienced agent can just say, oh, I guess we're doing this again.
Yeah. Well, and I one thing too that really stuck out to me was that commercial follows residential. And there's a lot of talks of commercial being in trouble, right, in 5 years, or when a lot of these adjustable rates, start coming up. And that's one thing that, our audience should really know is be grateful that we have the 30-year fixed out here.
Yes.
Because,
Absolutely.
the UK, Australia, and some other countries, they only have a 5-year.
Yes.
They look at Canada, I believe, is one of them as well, that only have a 5-year. And I would imagine, too, just thinking about that, it makes a lot of sense why you see a lot of Canadians down here purchasing. I would imagine they see that as well. Like, oh, wow, you guys have a 30-year 3% rate or 5%, 7% rate. That's great. So it kind of reframes that mindset too around a 5% rate being bad. It's like, well, it's also fixed for 30 years.
Exactly. And, I'll be honest, I bought an investment property in June of 2022, pick of the market. I knew it was the peak when I bought there. And I got a 5.8% investor rate, which I thought was terrible at the time. I'm like, this is outrageous. I'm going to refinance in a year. And now I'm like, you're going to have to, pry that rate from my cold dead fingers, even though I'm at, I think we discussed, I'm probably negative $250 a month on that. I get $1,600 a month. I'm in it for $19 with the HOA fees and all that. And so, but I have other investments that are offsetting that. I'm keeping it long term. So you ride those out long term. And these rates are the same way. You might feel like, oh, this is terrible. Well, those rates aren't forever. Nothing's forever. You get in where you can get in, and then you ride it down.
Are you consistently trying to fill your rental portfolio in any market? Do you have the Warren Buffett mindset of always buy?
Well, it all depends on my own ability to buy,
Right.
frankly. But if I have an ability to buy and I like the property and I would live there myself, we all have our own criteria for area, condition, all of that stuff. If I'm in a position, then yeah, I don't have a problem accumulating real estate. I think, first of all, I know real estate, so I like to invest in what I know.
Right.
And I follow it very closely. And long term, it's a very hard argument for anybody to say that long term it's not been beneficial. Anybody you talk to who's owned their home for at least 5 years is like, yeah, I haven't lost any money on it.
Right.
It's the short term that's the riskiest. It's like short term flips are like the day traders of Wall Street. You can lose a lot of money, you can make a lot of money, but it's the riskiest way of owning a home.
And if you're a short-term real estate investor out there and you do catch yourself in a position where you have to, you're in a negative equity position, make sure that you're positioning yourself with reserves and managing your money in a way that worst case scenario, you refi out that hard money loan I know that you're getting and you are holding it even if you're losing a few $100s in negative cash flow, but you're able to ride it out. Because I have a lot of buddies that took massive losses, but if they would have just rented it out 12, 18, 24 months down the line, they would have been selling in today's market and they would have probably made money or worst case scenario broke even. So
the condo I bought at the peak of the market. I saw it drop by, I bought it at 300. It dropped to about 260. And then all last year it climbed back up and I'm probably breaking even on it. If I wanted to sell it, I could, but I don't want to. I like it.
And you're not playing a 1-year game, right?
I'm not playing that game. Exactly. I'm in it for the long haul and eventually the rents will most likely go up. I mean, we're in a lull. Rents have not been rising for about, since August of 2021 here. Wow. And they just started going down in apartment complexes. I'm looking at single family. And, we go through these periods of lulls and stability and boredom, if you will, until they start moving again. And the reality is that the way our economy is going, the way our incomes are going, and our population is going and all of that, it's reasonable to expect that properties in the interior cities and the exterior, but the interior cities are going to continue to maintain their rents and their values and potentially definitely go up. I say potentially to that definitely in the same sentence. But I mean, I'm looking long term. It's reasonable to expect that $1,600 a month today is not going to be where it's going to be in 5 years from now.
Yeah, and just speaking of Arizona too, this is Arizona we're talking about, and this isn't nationwide too. Mm-hmm. Arizona, I think, is positioned pretty uniquely in a sense that we do have a lot of companies. One thing that really stuck out is we're going to be building spaceships here in Mesa.
I know. Can you believe that?
I know. I can't.
Star Trek right here.
that tripped me out when I heard that. I was like, wow, that's incredible to think. But that just goes to show, it gives you an example out there where, there's so many companies here, right? And there's, I think a lot of them are incentivized. And, one thing that always gets brought up is the water, and
it's such a funny one.
It is because and it's one of those things too where I'm like, I haven't researched it, to be honest. I'm not an expert in water and what's going on, but I would imagine if these companies, Tina, are investing billions and billions of dollars, I would imagine they have some data around this or they have folks looking into this.
Well, I could say we've had water scares before. Okay, and then we have a bunch of rain, and everyone's like, "Oh, okay, it's wet."
Everyone goes back. Yeah.
So I think most people who have been in Phoenix and lived here, like I've lived here since 1993, so we're looking at 30 years. We're so desensitized to water scares.
Right.
We're like, "Oh, one of those again." Okay. Just make sure you don't get a well. No. But the thing is that with water, we have azwater.gov is a good resource. It's a government resource. You can actually pull up an interactive map. You can click on little spots and let you know if they've gotten their assured water supply, who's supplying the water, what the subdivision is, and all of that, if you're afraid of that sort of thing. Some people, that's a big deal. They just want to make sure they're on city water. That's okay. Means they're going to be in the interior city because it just takes a while for that to come out. But right now, here's the thing about the water certificates. Water certificates are required for builders who are going to be selling to you and I. as individual consumers who are going to live in the property. Okay. If you are a Wall Street investor building or purchasing an apartment complex, you don't need a water certificate because the government doesn't care about you. You can lose your money.
Right.
You're not going to cause a consumer to lose their money because of lack of water. So that's the big thing. And it will most likely get rectified. We're looking at, 100 years out. A lot of things can happen in 100 years. A lot of things can happen in 5 years. We could have massive flood in here.
Yeah.
Right.
And, you never know.
They could be making rain clouds and making it artificially rain.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
100
yeah.
years from now, it's not unrealistic.
Bill Gates is going to make some machine. It's going to pull water out
Here
of
we
the
go,
air.
the mega city out in Buckeye.
Like, I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, like I said, I'm not a water expert either. All I know is that we have pulled enough permits that have water certificates for 3 years. If you look at all of our permitting and our building that we've done in the last 3 years, we have enough for another 3 years. So it's not something that if you buy a home today, if you have 100 years water, you have 100 years water.
Yeah,
know?
you're not going out. Yeah, there's not a massive drought that's going to happen tomorrow where all of a sudden you go to turn on your faucet and there's no water.
Yeah, I mean, that has happened in California. I mean, and there are some things that you have to be aware of because not everybody's on city water, right? There are wells out here, and there are shared containers underground that are for hauled water. And so all of the bad press that we got from the Rio Verde issue was from hauled water because the companies that were hauling water out to Rio Verde for those underground tanks that, houses would share, they were taking their water from Scottsdale.
Right.
So it wasn't that they didn't have water. It's just that this agreement had not really been solidified between those two cities. And Scottsdale's like, hello, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Do you know whatever happened with that? Because I never followed.
They figured,
They did.
figured it out.
So Scottsdale ended up.
Everybody's getting their water up there
Yep.
now?
Scottsdale's like, okay, we're fine now. We made an agreement. So Scottsdale's providing the water. They found a supply company, and so they're back in business.
Wow.
And it's not, again, it wasn't that they ran out of water. It was mostly a
And that
agreement.
was the story, right? We're
Yeah.
out of water.
I know. Well, water's a big deal out here. So anybody who's like, I can't turn on my faucet, that's going to create some pretty negative headlines. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, and especially in Arizona, I feel like it just automatically people like think of Arizona if they're not haven't been here. Or I was born and raised right here in Arizona, so it's like, but like people that move out here, sometimes they have like this idea of like Arizona being this desert and desolate like place that's like all brown and mountains and cactuses and like who knows?
Yeah.
And I mean, there
Some
we
parts
got
are. I mean.
yeah,
Well,
we have
you
a lot
know.
of that for sure, but
Well, we're doing a lot of things that make it a little more brown, so there's less grass, of course. They're not building as many golf courses. But in general, it's the farms. The farming aspect is what really sucks a lot of the water out, especially alfalfa. So that's been a big controversy. Alfalfa, the most water-sucking plant on the planet. I'm like, why do we grow that here again? But so I think that what people don't realize is that most of the water being used is not from population growth.
yeah.
It's from, increasing production from the farming.
And, back to kind of being an agent and, 2024 here. And, I know a lot of things are going on this year. But one thing I've been telling my team and kind of coaching my team up on is, in an election year, being 24, the most amount of homes are going to be sold between January and the end of August. So is there data surrounding that, or is that just word on the street right now that maybe is just being kind of emphasized because we're in this election year and that there could be more uncertainty around the end of the year Q4?
Okay, so typically elections have almost zero. And I say almost zero. Not exactly zero, but very little impact on whatever the housing market's doing. What it does have an impact on is stock market. And so there's two aspects of housing that do pay attention to the stock market, that they really rely on it, and that is retirees and luxury. So what happens over the last 4 elections, right after the election, the stock market has spiked. And so if you are rich, for lack of a better word, and you have a lot of assets in in the stock market, you're like, maybe I'll wait till after the election. I might be a little richer.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe I won't have to sell off as much of my portfolio. So oftentimes you'll hear somebody say in the fourth quarter, I think I'm just going to wait till after the election. Not because they're afraid or, they just want what's uncertain to become certain and see how the stock market, reacts to that and then perhaps buy in the spring. So what you see is a lag. And the thing about retirees is that the latter part of the year is not a big time for them anyway.
Right.
They're usually active right now. And then you have our regular seasons anyway. Our season is from January all the way up through May, and then those closings bleed into July, possibly August, but mostly June and July. And then you're on your downside. It's 1,000 degrees here. And you're already, and then from November, by the time you get to the election, November is the shortest month with a holiday, and I guarantee you will see a journalist out there that says, oh, sales from October to November.
Yeah.
Oh, they went down. It's terrible. Clearly the wrong person won.
Yeah.
And then come January, you're now ratifying the election, and it's the beginning of our spring season, then everything picks up, and that's obviously because the right person won. And so it's just the seasonality of our housing market coincides with the low time in the election and then an increasing activity right after the ratification. And so they always like to make those correlations. And the other correlation that's coming around is like, oh, mortgage rates. They're going to try to keep the mortgage rates down because it's a election year. Well, I went all the way back to 1991. If rates were already coming down and we had an election, they just continued. There's the rates were already doing what they were doing. The election was just in there. There's nothing that we can actually point to the election having the sole impact on what rates were doing. In fact, they typically did something after the election, which is either we had an election and we went into a recession, so the rates go down, or we had an election and they, whatever happened and the rates went up. It's what happens with rates is if everybody goes to the stock market, which it typically has happened, right? Then they're pulling out of bonds, and when you pull out of bonds, then it causes the rates to go up.
Right.
As they have to bribe you to come back. So that's why the bond rates go back up. So anyway, if anything, what affects the housing market after election is policy. It's not the election itself. People just aren't that, if you can buy a house, you buy a house. You're like, oh, maybe I'll wait to see if who so-and-so gets elected. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Most people don't care because they're going to do what they're going to do. It depends on whether or not they feel confident in their job, that they're going to keep their job, whether or not they feel good about the housing market in general. If they're going to put down roots, they're going to start a family. It just depends on where they are in life. And wherever they are in life, they're not going to be like, oh, wait, we got to wait till after the election. Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way.
And it's like, survivability is something that I'm sure everyone's like, it's like something I always go back to is like, if you can survive, like meaning if you can make that payment, then hang on, right? Like just, make that decision. And I just really want to emphasize that point because there's too many people I feel like just sitting and waiting. And, we've, as agents, right? Like we've all had the client with the tag on them in our CRM. That's like, this guy's told me he's going to buy next year.
After the election.
And then we've been watching. And it's just, and some folks have to see it for themselves. And I understand that, right? I've communicated really well to folks and really shown them your data and educated them as much as I possibly could. And it's like they saw, home prices continuously rise and they're like, man, you're right, I should have bought, but hey, I'm ready now and I'm jumping in. And that's respectable to me. And I understand that not everyone is going to be the data person that's, can see it on a graph and just it clicks.
Yeah.
Some people are more visual or they just need to, see their neighbor, in the rental property they own, like, come over for a beer and say, man, I'm paying $2,500. Like I locked in on a 3% rate and they're like still the renter. So
yeah, I'd say that my recommendation is you can find this on any kind of mortgage payment estimate website is to go to the amortization schedule, right? And go to payment 60, which is 5 years, and be like, where is my balance going to be then?
Yeah.
And what do you think your property value is going to be worth then? That's going to be your equity that you would have built up in 5 years just by making your payment.
yeah.
And can you say, if your rent's now $2,100, can you say that your rent's not going to go up in 5 years? Probably not. Is your rent probably going to be somewhere close to that in 5 years? Maybe. We don't know. But the fact is that if it's right now costing you, say, $300 extra to buy instead of rent, right? Are you going to do something else with that $300 is my question. Like,
That's
what are you
key.
going to do with that?
Very key, because like you said, most people they're throwing that away. Your buddy's spending at the club. Like most people think that they're doing themselves a service by doing that, but they're not investing in mutual funds. They're not buying bonds. They're not making additional investments with that.
Yeah, it's like the one thing you can kind of give yourself. You are literally paying yourself back a good portion of your payment every month, and then you've got your tax deduction. You have to remember that. So if you do the math of, how the mortgage payment works for tax purposes and for that equity buildup, then go out, extrapolate, 3 to 5 years, which I know is tough when you're in your 20s. Because I remember in my 20s, I'm like, I can't even think to next year. Whatever. I'm going to be 30. I don't even want to think about that. But the fact is, if you can just, we're all going to be paying this money anyway, just to see what would happen if we just did nothing and just did what you were going to do anyway, right? And say your home value doesn't go up at all, you're still going to probably find that it's a pretty shocking amount of money that you would have at the end of that time frame.
Well, and investors out there too. Like one thing, that's how I underwrite some deals. Like sometimes, like on seller carries, like I did one in North Phoenix. This lady carried 2.25% rate for 10 years, but we had to overpay a bit for her house, right? So we kind of more or less built in some of that interest into the purchase price. But at a 5-year mark, I mean, if you look at just how much is going towards principal, it made her happy. She got her number, right? And it penciled for us because at 5 years, when you look at an AM schedule, it's like, even if the market doesn't appreciate at all, I mean, then 7 and then 10 years, I mean, you start seeing that graph, because from my understanding that principal payment continues to escalate, right? So, and more starts going to principal. So, and I've heard people too, and I wanted to hear your opinion on if you think lenders or if like people are always like, oh, I don't want to refi because then it restarts that AM schedule and I'm going to be, like you see the classic, like I see it as an agent, right? Where people will buy a house and then they'll use it kind of like a credit card, right? They'll refi and refi and refi and refi.
Right, yeah.
Where
you're now basically rolling the cost of that stake into your house.
Yes, exactly. Or the cost of your BMW into your house. But it's paid off, guys. Like, don't worry.
Yeah.
So do you have any data that supports like when we go into these, high appreciation markets like we just came off of, right? And everyone was getting, their house was worth more and maybe they really liked their house. So they kept refining saying, oh, well, I'm reducing my rate, but I'm also doing a cash out refi instead of just a rate adjustment, right? So you don't always have to take out money. You can just adjust your rate. So is there any data or anything that you can speak on that really talks to that? Like, is that, I would imagine, it's got to be more prevalent in those times where we're just seeing especially just an unprecedented amount of appreciation. I mean, it's
since 2020, it has been a complete anomaly. So I hate to even use any of that, frankly, as any kind of norm or study or whatever, other than the fact that we had such a flood of liquidity. And that liquidity came in the form of, people getting literally money directly wired into their accounts. I mean, that is really unusual. I mean, to go back to the stimulus packages that were passed in 2008 under the Obama administration after he was elected, right after the Great Recession, they went to banks. And so most of that money went there and they kind of trickled down, if you will, eventually making it to our paychecks and gradually raising the money supply, and inflation kind of went up a little bit, but it wasn't like a big deal. But you take all that money and you wire it into somebody's account and they're like, pay your rent with this. Oh, wait, you don't have to pay your rent because we won't let them evict you. So go yourself a Peloton. It's fine. You know what I mean? Or buy yourself a car. Yeah. And basically all of that liquidity bled out in all these areas. And you could see the stock market, cryptocurrencies, that liquidity found a home somewhere. And and it found its home in refinancing, extra debt. A lot of people, they're like, I don't have to pay my student loans. I mean, there was all kinds of craziness that went on there. And I think if I were to say there was a message in there, that probably the worst thing you can do if you get free money is to go into more debt.
Yeah.
If you have unsecured debt, that's usually when inflation hits, it hits your credit card in, interest payments, and that's what really starts to cripple people. It might hit cars as well, but a lot of people got those cars on low interest rates. But overall, like people started defaulting on their cars a little bit. So it's a lot easier to get rid of your car, let that go, maybe default on a credit card, but do not default on your house.
Yeah, don't.
Because the one thing that we did learn from 2008 is that you let everything else go, that's fine. Do not default on your home because it locks you out from buying another home with a mortgage for 7 years. And what we saw was people defaulting on their mortgages in 2012, and they were locked out until 2018, and home values went up beyond what they were even able to buy it for anymore. So just stay in your home. Like,
make your payments.
Make that payment. Like, if anything else, get a roommate. Do whatever you can. But we just don't really, and I don't really think that you're going to see people in that position. You see plenty of people that are in the position, but they're not going to go all the way to foreclosure because there are people like you that are like, hey, we'll help you out. And that's what we didn't have in 2008. We did not have the people saying, hey, we can buy your property because
Well, we see the value in the debt. I mean, if you just look at inflation and just, if you look at it from a payment standpoint too, it's like, I don't know if we'll ever see rates at that level again. I mean, maybe, right? Who knows? But, and also to speak on the foreclosure and pre-foreclosure thing, like, there's so, like, I don't forget the people out there that are like, oh, Luke, we're going to see massive foreclosures. And it's like, we didn't forget you, all of you folks out there writing those
maybe in
headlines.
commercial you might.
Yeah.
Commercial.
Yeah.
That's probably where the opportunity is, but we don't see a whole lot of it in residential.
But in residential.
Equity or you have a good rate. One of the two,
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You're not underwater. You have choices. You're still going to have, in every market, you're going to have somebody who goes all the way, and I'm sure those homes are diamonds. Sure, they're not meth houses or anything like that with toxicity. But overall, when you look at our history of foreclosures, we're so low. We could double or triple, and we'd still be below.
But
where we were.
The first thing that the headlines are going to come out is, foreclosures triple. Right, and then it just creates this
from 5 to 15.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, triple from what is the question? And so we could literally triple and still not be in a crisis because we are foreclosing on fewer homes today than we did in literally the 90s when Cactus Road was a dirt road. Wow. Okay, right. We didn't even have the 101; it was a bunch of bridges nowhere. So, I mean, knowing that we had more foreclosures in the mid-90s, as small as we were then, than we do today, as large as we are. Like, Gilbert was farms and flies. That's it. There's like one stop sign in the whole city, and we had more foreclosures than we do today. So again, we could triple, and it would be, an opportunity for some people, but it would not be a crisis by any standpoint that would cause overall values to decline.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Tina. I know it's been a great time having you in studio.
Oh, good.
Yeah, this was amazing. Yeah, I was looking forward to this one as soon as we heard that we were getting you on. So I was very excited, and I learned a lot. So I'm glad we had the chance to get you on here.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you guys had me. And check out the slides I gave you on the recessions by generation. I think it really does open up your eyes on where all that advice from our grandparents and parents come from, that in their 20s and 30s, from 20 to 35, the baby boomers had 4 recessions. I mean, literally all in that time frame, with unemployment that was soaring. They got as high as 10%. Their mortgage rates got as high as 18%. So when our parents say, don't get into too much debt, try to have a backup plan for your, I know you have your dream job, have a backup plan just in case it doesn't work out. It comes from the fact that they are freaking economy ninjas by this point in their lives. And so They are savvy. If we have a recession, I don't want anybody to be afraid of recessions. They're just big, humble pies for us. That's where we find out. Like I just told you, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been paying Acorn TV $5 for 4 years.
Yeah.
I have not watched like one show. And so, I mean, this is where you really start looking at your budget, what's coming in and coming out, and you become financial ninjas through recessions. So don't be afraid of it. Just hit it head on.
I love that, Tina. And to everyone out there, we appreciate you guys getting to this point in the show. I know it's provided a lot of value. I've learned a ton, and it's been great to have Tina here in studio. So thank you guys so much. We'll see you guys on the next episode of Young Money Mindset.